Hey everybody, welcome to Tabletop for Two. I am Beth Ball, one of the writers behind D&D Duet. Joining me is Jonathan Ball, the other writer behind D&D Duet. Tabletop for Two is a D&D Duet show where we take a deep dive into how to play one-on-one D&D. So if you want to learn more about this special playing style, you can visit dndduet.com and find adventures, advice, help, all kinds of things. You can also follow us on socials, on Twitter at dndduet and Instagram at dndduet. Hello to friends in chat. We're so happy that you guys are here.
Pink sparkles in the chat.
Tonight's special episode is on villain design.
Dun, 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 dun. Oh my gosh.
So, honey.
I love a good villain.
Me too. They're my favorite.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite villain ever?
Favorite villain ever?
Mm.
I don't think that's... Gosh, I want to have a really cool answer, but I don't know. Like, the Joker from Dark Knight stands out to me as a really excellent villain.
Right?
Thanos stands out to me as a really excellent villain.
Okay, but favorite villain?
I know. I don't know. Who's your favorite villain?
All my favorite villains are secretly the protagonist.
Like who?
Darth Vader.
Okay.
Darth Vader. The protagonist of the whole thing.
I like, so Darth Vader, not bad Anakin Skywalker.
Oh, I like Darth Vader.
He's got to have his legs chopped off. Spoiler alert. Got to have his legs chopped off and brought back before he can be your favorite.
It's not about that. It's about him being Darth Vader. He's so much cooler. Anakin's so pouty and cranky.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like him as a kid, but I'm sure that's shared by lots of people. Darth Vader. Pseudo villains, though not exactly like the guy that I like in Jurassic Park. The Phantom of the Opera. All the people who wear all black in a movie, that's probably my favorite character. Unless it's a movie where almost everyone wears all black, and then I have to get more discerning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Definitely Darth Vader, though, my favorite villain of all time, I think. Okay, sorry. Just wanted to know while we were here at the very beginning.
No, that makes sense.
Pink Sparkles, who's your favorite villain? Are there friends in chat? Who are your favorite villains? You can have more than one, too. Really fast, while we all kind of think about this question, we did want to extend a special thank you to our amazing patrons who make this stream possible. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means the world to us and helps keep this and all of our different activities going. We so appreciate your support of the Land of Vampires campaign and for supporting our streams.
Ooh, speaking of Land of Vampires, good villain there.
Mm-hmm.
But before we talk about that, our stream is also sponsored tonight by Aurora. Aurora is the prequel novella for the Age of Azuria high fantasy series, the story of a magical world that teeters on the brink between light and darkness. In this exciting action and magic-packed series filled with druids, pirates, werewolves, and more, ancient forces awaken and new heroes rise to the occasion. But this time, who will prevail? So if you want to check it out, you can visit bethballbooks.com/join to join the Story Enclave. That's Beth's reading community for her fiction. And as a special treat, you will receive a free ebook copy of Aurora when you sign up. Yeah. Boom Bunny says the best villains have goals, which are misunderstood, I think. I mean, that's what we see with the Joker. That's what we see with Thanos. Pink Sparkles, Mr. Nobody from Doom Patrol is a pretty good villain. I'm not familiar with Doom Patrol.
Not either. I'm so sorry. Now I feel left out.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up. I think that Thanos is one of my favorite villains. Hi, Z. Good to see you. I love having returning friends in the chat. It's so good to see all of you. Thanos is one of my favorite examples because it's so clear that he thinks that he's doing the right thing and that nobody else is daring or bold enough to take the dramatic actions that he needs to take. Like, he's the perfect example of how the villain thinks that they're doing not only the right thing, but they are the protagonist of their own
They're
lives.
the hero. So I love Thanos because he sacrifices so much for his good, you know?
He thinks so, at least.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that when he you know, the
Spoiler alerts.
Yeah. He gives something up.
And he sacrifices Gamora.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of villains are villainous because they want everybody else to make sacrifices on their behalf. They're unwilling to sacrifice anything, but he's like an extra compelling villain to me because he's in the thick of it. There's like stakes for him, you know, like he's got an ante on the table at least. That's what I'm trying to say. He's got skin in the game.
I get that. My pushback for Thanos is that he sacrifices other people. He never puts his own, as far as he's concerned, or the choice that he's trying to make, he himself is not on the table for sacrifice. And that actually brings us to, we'll get to this in a second. So then we'll skip ahead and then jump back. That sets him up really well as a counterpoint to a lot of the Avengers, because for so many of them, they are self-sacrificial, or at least they're putting their lives on the line in what it is that they're doing, while Thanos is putting other people's lives on the line. So if we look at that kind of sacrifice versus sacrificing others versus sacrificing self, we view that very, very differently, like as a society. But really fast, I wanted to do our overview. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
So a common term that you may hear in D&D and TTRPG spaces is BBEG. It's an acronym. Sorry, I was just thinking about all the acronyms that you say to me all the time that I don't know. This was one that took me a bit too, because it doesn't sound like it is. Yeah, so big bad evil guy, right? Also doesn't sound very scary. I think BBEG sounds scarier. But it refers to the primary villain in your campaign. So the ultimate evil character whom your characters will face off against at the end of the campaign. And I wanted to come up with something that wasn't going to be a spoiler for this. So I don't think anyone will feel spoiled. Strahd, in Curse of Strahd, is generally the BBEG for the campaign. He's the primary villain. You'll meet other sketchy people along the way, along the adventure, but Strahd is going to be the big one who you face at the very, very end. We talked last week about campaign design for one-on-one D&D and the tweaks that a storyteller or DM needs to make to create a campaign that revolves around the PC. And then we want to take similar steps in designing the campaign's villain. Ideally, they will be someone who is opposed to the PC and what they want. Perhaps someone the PC will hate immediately, or who's set up to betray the PC. But we are not just talking about BBEGs tonight, though I think that they tend to be the most fun. There are plenty of ways to involve villains of all different levels in your duet game.
Oh, yeah.
I love villains. I'm so excited.
Yeah, villains are the best. I wanted to also, I think a distinction that occurred to me that's interesting is the distinction between a villain and the antagonist of a story. And I think that the antagonist is really the trouble or the problem or the source of the conflict that the characters are struggling against, but that might not actually be a villain, like a capital V villain. So for instance, the party might be racing against time, and time is the antagonist of an arc, and they need to accomplish more things than they have the ability to finish in the amount of time that they have before something happens or whatever, right? In that way, time really becomes the pressure, the driving force. But a villain is not just a concept, or not just a faceless, nameless thing. Like, a villain to me has personality, and that makes them, well, A, that much more compelling, and B, Well, it's not to say that like, a villain can't represent something that the party is struggling against, right? Like you can have a villain that represents chaos, like the Joker, for example. And Batman wants to be order. Joker's a great villain for him because he represents chaos. Your villain can embody or symbolize these more kind of nebulous forces for the party to work against. But a villain, at the end of the day, has personality and motivations and flaws and a story, whereas thirst might not have a story.
Well, so you're saying a villain is a person, a character, an entity.
I think it's got to be, right?
I think generally, if I was just thinking about, I was just thinking about The Witcher, like in this instance, I'm referring to the series on Netflix where you have whatever that one society is and their ideology. I'm forgetting the name of right now. Ones who are attacking and murdering everyone.
Oh yeah.
Spoiler alert again. We need a spoiler alert this at the beginning.
I'm so sorry. At the beginning, big red block
spoiler
text.
Alert. We're really sorry.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Anyway, so they have specific people who are, if I could remember names better, this would be a lot more compelling. But they have specific people who take on this villainous role. Nilfgaard, thank you. But Nilfgaard in itself, as a nation, is a villain. I think we can make the argument, at least for them being a villain, beyond them just being an antagonistic force. Like they represent that. That's one of those, to me, gray areas where if we wanted to kind of push what's between villains and antagonists, or what might be in that kind of space between, I think Nilfgaard serves as that example. And as we get closer to the conflict, we can see individual villains who are part of Nilfgaard.
See, I would think about the Nilfgaard as an antagonistic force, and the hunter guy with the like the plume as like the villain.
Yeah, but he's kind of lame and he doesn't seem to know what's going on. I don't think we know who the true villain is yet.
I think the true villain. Wait, no. I think.
Okay, we need to focus.
Okay.
So, will you say a little bit more about motivations, flaws?
Well, we talked a little bit about like motivations and flaws for characters in a more broad scope in one of our previous episodes. Which one was that? Characters? We were talking about compelling characters. Yeah.
Yes.
And we talked about how characters represent like good NPCs are going to have a set of motivations that may align with or run counter to party's motivations, and that's really going to determine how often they're perceived as being helpful or friendly, or how often they're perceived as antagonistic, as potential villains. And I think it's the best villains are going to be the ones whose motivations are running directly counter to what the party wants. Like they both can't. I think the best villains tend to be villains in which their motivations are such that the party couldn't get what they want and the villain get what they want at the same time.
I think that's almost always going to be the case, right?
Yeah, totally.
We did get an interesting question in the chat. So how does cosmic horror fit in? Is Cthulhu a villain? Vast entities that don't really have personalities or even really know that the protagonist is there. I can't speak very much to Cthulhu specifically, but I think with a vast force that it could totally be. I don't know that I've latched onto your villain antagonist thing. I think as long as it's, I think as long as whatever the massive things desires are creating some sort of an active obstacle to the party, that's going to be motivation enough for them to be a villain. And I think that could create some really interesting contrast with what we expect out of the hero's journey, where like this, this one villain, he's not going to like wipe out this nation, even though he's super powerful. He's going to go grab the hero's sister and like hold her hostage because that's more emotionally exciting. Instead, if you have this like vast, impossible force that I think gets on a different, I don't know, you have an almost spiritual level of whether horror or horribleness of some kind. I don't know. I think that would totally work. Obviously it works. I don't think they have to know that the protagonist is there. I don't know that villains have to be aware of what the protagonist is doing. I think in most cases, most D&D campaigns, that they will be aware of what the party is doing. They may not care for a while because the party is going to be beneath their notice. The party will care. Like, they're going to get fixated on this person.
So let me ask this. Like, to me, like, Cthulhu doesn't care about the hero, doesn't care about you or I, doesn't care about anything. Its concerns are beyond the comprehension of mortals. And so in that case, like, I guess I don't see a difference. Is there any meaningful difference? Like, am I making this thing up where like there's like villains and there's antagonists, or like there's villains or problems to solve? Are they tomatoes and tomatoes? Is there any meaningful difference?
I'm sure there's a meaningful difference. So I think the question is, how does the hero perceive them? Mm-hmm. But does the hero perceive Cthulhu as being counter to all of the things that they're trying to achieve, counter to whatever force of good or right is happening in the world?
Uh-huh. So we might have to appease or put Cthulhu to sleep in order to achieve our goals. And Cthulhu might not care or be aware, but, for the hero, from the hero POV, Cthulhu still represents a villainous force because they again can't both exist and get what they want at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the villain doesn't have to be aware of the hero to be the villain. You just did this in our game with Persephone, where Cassandra was showing her the primordials and what the world looked like before the gods kind of settled the plains and made things more ordered. So we have that really classic dichotomy of order and chaos in that instance. Primordials don't care about Persephone. They might care about Cassandra, but them coming back still poses mortal terror and destruction to the world that Persephone holds dear. So they are still, she's not going to go fight them, but that doesn't make them not at least a potential villain if things were to go wrong.
Yeah, I get that.
I think what we would have happening more often is what we do have happening in our campaign, where you have a person standing between this ideal or manifestation, what you're calling an antagonistic force, and Valindra Shadowmantle, or someone who's maybe manipulating some other cosmic force to harm lots of people. That's going to be who the hero butts heads with, because we're taking specific example of good and specific example of evil and pitting them against one another.
I get that.
So part of what we're trying to say, villains are, it's like really exciting to think about, but totally. Part of what we're trying to say is that the villain needs to have some form of correspondence to the hero, and the greater the correspondence to the PC, sorry, I'm using PC and hero interchangeably and I shouldn't do that. But they should correlate together. I was Sasha Black in 13 Steps to Evil, How to Craft Super Bad Villains. I just have the little baby ebook copy. Anyway, Sasha talks about, she uses the example of the Hunger Games in her book, and is talking about how everyone in the book should have so you pick kind of a moral center for the character. The main characters, in this case, Katniss, who represents self-sacrifice in this reading of the Hunger Games. Everyone else exists somewhere along the spectrum of self-sacrifice. But we have Katniss at one end, we have President Snow, who sacrifices other people instead of himself, but puts children to death, the opposite of self-sacrifice at the opposite end of the spectrum. And that's what makes him the villain. And that's what makes them good as rivals, honestly, is because they're at opposite ends of one ideal spectrum. And so whenever, for the PC, whatever it is that they care about, a lot of what we talked about last week with personalizing a campaign to them, you might not know the BBEG when you first start your campaign, and that's fine. They'll come to light as you go. We tend to actually have we tend to have arc villains instead of like one huge villain, just because level 4 character working towards a level 32 boss, what are they supposed to do? There's not very much that they can do, but they can wrap their minds around like, oh man, this level 7 boss. Maybe that's all they need to be taking on at that point. And so you can kind of put different villains in front of them. And then as you go, as you get more comfortable in your homebrew world, as you put the pieces together, then you string along and structure the higher tier villains.
I think a pretty common thing too is to like have the kind of lower levels kind of focus on the characters figuring out who they are. And in that way, like as the characters kind of define who they are simultaneously, and sometimes unbeknownst to them, they're defining their ultimate challenge, their ultimate BBEG. So if the party decides that we stand for this, or like this character stands for this, then they've created, if they are this thing, they've created their shadow self, which will crystallize into a compelling villain. I was going to get somewhere.
I like it.
So in the early stages, the characters are kind of solidifying who they are. And then kind of in the, 4, 5, 6, like after things have been going for a little while, I think that we can, like, it's pretty common to have kind of not the BBEG, maybe like, pulling back its face mask and revealing itself like, it's me. But maybe like the lieutenants or the characters start to deal with ripples of the actions of the BBEG. Why is, for instance, why is this forest being cut down? We're funding a war machine. Oh, what's behind this war machine? Oh, right. So I think that kind of slow reveal can be the payoff can be really, really sweet when you start when the characters start to realize that the things that they've been doing are interconnected or can be tracked back to a source.
If we look at The Princess Bride, for example, it seems as though we're starting with a villain, and then we have a very networked villain who, we realize this person isn't the villain, neither is this person, neither is this person. And so then we have someone in a position of power with lots of people serving under them. We work our way back to, this person is like the villain.
Totally. Caroline is flopping around behind me.
She okay?
She's such a nut. But yeah, knowing what your PC stands for will help you clarify and crystallize what your villain needs to be embodying or symbolizing, or just like what they're after. So if your PC is all for unity, then the bad guy is trying to fracture people apart,
or to manipulate unity in order to
like corrupt unity. I like it.
So they can like even be seemingly on the same side, but then it turns out that they're working towards opposite means. And that's the same thing we've been talking about of like, as you dig in further, more things will come to light and you can play with those different aspects of various issues.
Do you have any favorite villains from our campaigns, honey?
I have lots of favorite villains from our campaigns. Some of the like smaller tier ones stand out just because like the ones at the beginning that the characters face as they learn that they can defeat villains and antagonistic forces. I think that's a really cool transition to go from feeling powerless in your world to feeling powerful. And then that's when the characters start to answer some of those important questions of who they are, what they're about, what they're trying to achieve. And so those initial stages, I think, are really interesting and special because the characters are still figuring so many things out. And then, you know, you hit level 7 and it's like, oh yeah, I can totally take on a green dragon. That's not a big deal. Taking on like a, you know, age of some kind at a lower level is a big deal. I also like villains that come back over and over and over again.
Oh yeah.
So ones like people like liches who can't be killed necessarily, or revenants that don't die. You just get rid of them for a while. I think are really interesting. And I also think that that tends to be more realistic to the sorts of problems that whether it's something we're dealing with personally or problems that we see like social ills, like you solve part of a problem and then a different part of it manifests. So as you dig deeper, you get more into the core of what's actually going wrong here, what's actually the problem, or you get deeper into what it is that you are trying to figure out for yourself, I think is really interesting. So it's kind of that cyclical, pattern experience exploration. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah. I liked in our first campaign, the Revenant continuing to come back and then like the slow reveal of what was going on with him. And a Revenant's like a really serious monster to throw at a lower level party. Like they're pretty serious and they can't be dealt with except for in very specific ways. And so that was a fun bad guy to have attached to something that I was also trying to slow walk in our campaign, right? Like this Revenant was tied to this character's, kind of gap in memory, and continuing to deal with this Revenant, the more clarity that came around the Revenant also brought more clarity with what was going on with that character's history. And that worked out pretty well, I think.
When you made the Revenant, did you know who they were?
No. Much like 95% of everything that happens in any of our games, I found out along the way. And then it was all crystallized in the shower the weekend before it went down.
Perfect. There you go.
That's how it
So
goes.
note for the DMs watching, grab a Revenant, add a DMPC who may or may not remember parts of their past.
Throw them in.
You'll figure out who the Revenant is in this person's past as you go. And then, ta-da! Then you're ready for the reveal. Then they just keep arriving and getting destroyed and arriving and getting destroyed until you figure out who it is that they are.
One of the best things about a Revenant is that all it takes is a dead body to be around somewhere. And so the characters are sailing on a ship. Do, no problem. Boom. Bloated corpse pulls itself up the anchor chain, and then it's on.
Exciting.
This isn't a show about Revenants, though. It's a show about villains.
Revenants make for good villains,
They
though.
do. That's true.
Why is that? I also think they make for good combat creatures. And again, we were talking about villains that recur. I think that makes them especially outside of other types of story narratives. I think that's what makes them especially exciting for D&D campaigns.
Definitely.
And thinking about duet mechanics for combat, you can kind of build up to something like, take away some of the Revenant's abilities or take away some of its damage when you introduce it at lower levels.
More powerful?
Yeah, and then add in interesting questions.
Speaking of things that good villains can do, that's got to be one of them, right? Like the villain's got to, a good villain needs the ability to escape justice or interact or antagonize or bait or something. They mess with the characters, but not immediately get trapped and beaten to death because your party was a little bit more prepared than you thought they might be.
And that's one of those like tricksy DM moments, right? Like, what do you do when your character banishes the interesting thing you had for them to fight?
Totally.
Just keep going.
I'll admit that you were able to defeat one of my BBEGs way earlier than I intended for you to. And so I just made that BBEG a lieutenant of a new BBEG who was going to be more prepared.
And that's a great strategy, right? Secretly, this person. That's great because
he was talking like he was the head of the whole organization, but that organization is a subset of super evil organization.
Dun, dun.
Incorporated. Over 100 billion screams.
Captured. But I think that that's important because we don't want to penalize the player for coming up with a cool creative idea, rolling well to make said idea come about. It doesn't make the villain lame for the PC to be successful when combating them.
That's something I definitely like reflecting on when I first started DMing was I had a lot of intelligent creatures stick around for unwinnable fights. And they would have fled, like they weren't anticipating somebody coming along and resurrecting them or anything. So they definitely would have tried to preserve their life. It's what you got. And so that also kind of like prevented you from having messy problems. Like, this super bad dude just tried to kill you and now they're trying to surrender. Like, I know your characters are typically going to show mercy, but like now you have this prisoner. What's that look like? And that would have also opened up more RP. It's harder to RP with characters that are dead. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Yeah. Well, especially because I never play people who have Speak with Dead. So it's like, I wonder what they knew. Anything in their bag? Nope. All right.
They have a journal in which I can't tell you how many villains I've written that have detailed. Dear diary, today I nefariously.
We've uncovered several journals.
Captain's log. Here's the story of what happened here.
I think they're very helpful.
Definitely.
Hey, but villains tend to be egotistical. It makes sense that they would write down all of their good ideas and all of their successful plans. And then they just didn't anticipate people to come along, murder them, and then find said records of their brilliant plans. You know what I would do if I were an evil villain?
What's that?
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
I would set it up to have either a real or a fake death, and then killing me was what set off the cataclysm.
Yeah.
I warn them, this isn't what you want to do. And then disaster beyond their imagination occurs.
Yeah, killing them
stopping it.
Is the catalyst for the bad thing. It reminds me of our
disaster.
Goat Devil summoning fight.
Mm-hmm.
With it was like the druid spell where you make the thicket of thorns, the spike growth, and like so
and they were like just running along
like,
it, and they shed enough blood on it
to like fill the ritual summoning thing for the Balgro.
Then it came.
Yeah.
Sorry. So he created because that was kind of jumbled. It was a really exciting fight. So he created the situation where this dryad was trapped and we're trying to save her. And so there were all these goat people. somewhere, but they had been worshiping the demon and were trying to like bring it to life or bring it to this plane. And so we cleverly used, I think it's spike trap, I'm not sure, but anyway, one of the ones that creates an area of thorns, and you take like 5 points piercing damage whenever you move through it. But the goat people, in their fervor to bring back the demon, just kept moving through it because that allowed them to shed enough blood. So even our really good plan of like, if you can't get to the summoning circle, you can't summon anything, backfired. It was a pretty good plan though.
It is a good plan. And that whole mechanic was definitely not something I made up in the moment.
You later let me wash away a chalk-drawn summoning circle, I think. Oh, no, that wasn't it. I kept exploding them. They had them on tiles.
Yeah.
Learned my lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, you became very suspicious of any kind of circle from that point forward.
It's on the ground.
Fool me
It
once,
makes sense.
Shame on you. Fool me twice. Can't.
Exploding Earth.
Exploding Earth. That's right. What are some other tools
okay, honey?
in a good villain's arsenal, honey? The ability to escape and antagonize and provoke is one. What's another one?
So would that be, oh, you did that with Celeste one time where we thought we were attacking her, but she had like a spectral version of herself there. So like she's learning about the heroes when they aren't really getting to learn anything about her. I think that the mechanics around layer actions and legendary actions are really important. Like a villain as someone who operates, they want to survive. They have things that they want to achieve. So they're only going to deal with the heroes in positions in which they feel at home, strengthened, and capable. And so being able to control the environment around them, and that's bringing together what you were saying at the beginning, bringing together the villain and the antagonist. The very earth beneath your feet is turning against you. The walls are literally crumbling down because you're attacking this person in their place of power.
I love some like big bad evil guy, big encounters, and a few things that I've learned running those successfully. I make a little mark for like, remind yourself to make a mark in initiative order for lair actions, or else you're going to forget them, because it's weird for one character to have multiple things that they can do on a turn. And then I also like, another one of my favorite tips is to jot down a little note for your villain to say something, because in the midst of this big complicated combat, they're going to be delivering those sweet, sweet one-liners and taunting the players and messing with their heads and evil guy monologuing. You caught me monologuing. And that's just part of it. And, that's, jot down some notes like I probably have more written notes about what the bad guy is going to say than like how the combat should run. Because it's super important, right? Like the combat should be RP opportunities as well.
Well, and that's something to, especially in a one-on-one game, to take into account, because you're both going to be managing, even if it's just the villain with multiple different fancy things in their stat block and the player running their PC and a sidekick, for example, you're both managing different things with high stakes. And so have those moments. So we will often do like dialogue, blah, 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 blah. Pause. A round of combat.
Yeah.
More dialogue. Pause. A round of combat, or 2 rounds dialogue. And that's something that I've tried to figure out a different way around. Like, how can I be doing all these cool things and say exciting things on my turn?
Yeah.
It's too much to, I at least haven't found an easy way to juggle all of those things. And so I appreciate that we kind of focus on the one thing, do that, put it on hold, focus on the next thing, do that, and put it on hold. So that way I don't miss asking a question or delivering my own one-liner. in one instance, and then in the other, I do find out what's going on with the villain. But times when we haven't quite managed that, you've always been really good about, while the villain was attacking you, they said blah 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 blah, because we want it to always be moving things forward.
Like the fight needs to have a narrative purpose, and if that's not being served, then it's kind of like, oh, we're just rolling dice and screaming at each other.
I mean, and if you're PC, like we were talking about playing with kids a couple weeks ago, if the player loves to have combat and just wants to kill stuff, that's fine too. But it's going to be, I think, more exciting and more fun for them if they're killing something for a reason. This spider attacked a whole family and held them hostage and slowly drained their blood over weeks. That spider is going to be a lot more exciting to murder than this random other scary spider.
This spider is just trying to live in its cave.
You are trying to go through its cave.
And then we have conflict. Boom. So what about villains? And I like to think one of the things that is helpful for me when I think about villains is NPCs that have motivations and all that good stuff that good NPCs have, is that villains also have relationships. And like some villains might be this uncaring, you know, like I'm a computer. I don't care about anyone. Everyone is disposable to me kind of villain. And that's fine. Those are good villains. But I think villains are especially awesome when they actually care about the people that they're that are in their organization, or like, you know, feel the loss of a trusted lieutenant, or a villain that's going to be angry with the party for having, you know, dispatched their most loyal guard or whatever.
Or a villain with a pet.
A villain with a pet, depending on how horrifying the pet is.
With a horrifying pet, but it's still something or someone that they care about. You know that I love Mother Gothel and Rapunzel because I think she's such a good contemporary villain. And part of what makes her such a good, part of what I think works so well for her, like she cares about Rapunzel's hair more than anything. And so then when, again, spoiler, when Flynn Rider figures that out and figures out how to support the villain and save Rapunzel is trying to save him. Like everybody's working together / against each other at odds. But that is I love that movie so much. That's such a great scene. You have 3 characters all working at cross purposes, but the villain is trying to force the hero Rapunzel into a compromise by taking away what she cares about. And then the other hero, Flynn Rider, takes away what the villain cares about while also removing what the other hero Rapunzel cares about.
Yeah.
But then everything works out okay.
Tangled is like the best.
So good.
Yeah. Let's see.
Sparkle says the villain in my ongoing campaign is kind of never present villain. They're doing terrible things that affect the world, but the PCs are only just now starting to discover that there's someone responsible for these things. I think that's awesome. Like a kind of behind the scenes villain.
The spider, the center of the
like
web.
A puppet master. Yeah. Just kind of poke the things and then out they go. But yeah, a really powerful, hyper networked villain who's able to influence not just the world immediately around them, but kind of world at scope. There are things I want to say about what's going on in Tales of Eldura that I can't because you're sitting here and it'll spoil things, but hopefully cool things happening with the villains in Tales of Eldura.
I can't wait. I also like villains that like sit at the center of the spider web and pull the strings and like, affect the world and stuff, because I mean that's how most villains in our real life don't put on costumes and, you know, like run around doing things really overtly. A lot of times they're sitting at the center of things, but, you know, are kind of more that puppet mastery type. And it can be really satisfying in a D&D game to find that person and crush them.
I was thinking about one of Matt Colville's suggestions in his DM videos where he says early on in the campaign to have the villain like make a pass at the characters and like leave them alive or imprison them or something, to where the villain is like flexing their strength, showing the characters like you cannot possibly defeat me. And then the villain goes on about their villainous life and whatever it is that they want to do. You did that in our Strahd campaign that we played with the D&D club. And it was really sweet. Like it just stood out to me so much. Because I know I'd been playing for a bit. I understand that as a level 3 character that I can't go take on Strahd, but the kids were like so excited about being part of this vampire campaign. They just wanted to go kick some vampire butt. And I was like, no, we can't. We'll die. And we'll just try it and see. No, literally, we will die. So then my cranky character, which maybe wasn't the best character choice, although I love her, is like, well, you can go. I'm going to stay here because you're going to die. And that was like, that actually sunk in for them just a little bit. But like the level difference wasn't quite making sense. But I love that too, of like this villain's narrative was so gripping that they're like ready to go take on the BBEG right from the get-go.
I mean, his name's on the book.
Yeah.
So what about, honey, what about villains that evolve?
Mm-hmm.
Villains that turn into friends.
Or villains who at least stop being villains. I was thinking about Drogo in our campaign and Feynara, where you achieve your villainous ends to the best of your ability. And then she was actually an interesting example, because she was kind of like, if we're thinking of it as a web, she's like midway down a string and is like trying to get the party to help her, and then they're not going to. So then she goes to the villain instead to get them to help her. And then that kind of works out. They're not exactly. And anyway, our heroes ended up putting her mercifully to death because they kind of came to cross purposes, and there wasn't really a good way forward. And she was too afraid of the villain and her loved ones to. Is this example working, do you think?
When you said, I
want to make sure it's being specific enough.
No, I love this example, but like when you said Feynara, I was thinking Feyfina, and I was like, wait. Feynara was the summer Eladrin
who you hated,
who kidnapped your character. Ooh, I hated her.
Sometimes things happen to the PCs, so you guys can switch GM and player in the same campaign, and then the GM/now player takes it very personally that your PC has. I've at least found, when we've switched, I find it really hard to DM PC my PC, because I'm so used to them being like the driving narrative force. It's hard for them to just like take a back seat. Driving the car. I love Pink Sparkle's suggestion of villains to lovers. We did that in our adapted Curse of Strahd campaign that's now Land of Vampires, and it was so much fun.
Yeah. Lord Drago is one of my favorite DNPC / villain / I guess he wasn't really a DNPC though, was he?
I don't think, maybe just for that one special session where you wanted to use the nightmare. What am I thinking of? The Nightwalker.
Yeah. I don't think I was actually like rolling for him though. I think I was just telling you how cool he was and making you survive the encounter.
Well, he was immune to any of the Nightwalker's damage.
Silly Nightwalker.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when villains can turn, I love a good redemption. Oh, I just thought about my favorite Final Fantasy VIII, and we have the sorceress. Spoiler alert: we have the sorceress Adia, who's like this like witch queen of this kind of aggressive nation, and the player characters are said to assassinate her, and they try to assassinate her, and it doesn't go in their favor. But eventually they figure out that she's not just this, unthinking, evil ruler trying to amass power or whatever. Like there's a really good reason, and she ends up, you know, being aligned with the players, and that's a really great example.
So the players, like, it can only go one way when they fight her?
Yes. So like there are a few different things I mean, it's a game, so like the narrative depends on them. Like you're in an unwinnable fight.
Okay.
You don't know that going in.
I mean, that's kind of what I was wondering. You do know that going in?
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, you don't know that going in. Yeah. I think that kind of setup is interesting to think about. Like, we were talking about that, putting a really high level villain in front of lower level PCs, and kind of going from there of they're not going to kill the PCs because it's not worth it, but they're going to send a message. Stop asking questions about this. So the PCs are going to do then. Like, that's the perfect way to puppet master your party. Tell them not to do something.
Nobody leaves this island.
How do we get off this island?
Gauntlet thrown down.
But I think that Lord Drago is really an exciting character in the Land of Vampires campaign. And I like that he went with more, like, he is mostly, but he's like bored. And so he's kind of interested to see how things go.
He's not apathetic so much as, like Beth said, kind of bored with what's going on in his current world. The characters represent this like big sudden change in his kind of Groundhog Day like experience. And so he's watching them with a great deal of interest. I'm really excited for in the Land of Vampires campaign for that to kind of be fleshed out some more. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to tell jokes for 3 minutes and then sign off. What do you call a vampire that has... I don't actually have a joke. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Tabletop for Two. It's clear that I can't carry this by myself, so we're going to sign off for tonight. I do want to say, though, that our streaming schedule is going to be a little bit different for next week. Next Tuesday, we are not going to be streaming Tales of Eldura. Isn't that right? We're not streaming Tales of Eldura, but we will resume the following Tuesday. In Tilvane, in the All Faiths Chapel, where this kind of second arc of Gareth's story is going to... if you enjoy our work, you have our patrons to thank. Our lovely patrons over on patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress make all of our video content possible, and they get sweet, sweet one-on-one D&D rewards every month. They're kind of helping us put together this Land of Vampires adventure. It's going to turn into a campaign book. It's really big and exciting, so we're really excited to have them. If you want to join them over there and support our work, check them out on patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress. Additionally, we will be additionally, you might want to check out our one-on-one adventures on D&D Duet, and we just appreciate you all showing up. Hit the like button, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Okay. I'm outie. Thank you all. Happy gaming. Mad love. We'll see you next time. I'll be older then. We'll see you next time. Okay. Bye.